missiles on that date. One of them hit a Rashid Hotel when I was there.
Germany. I'm a German journalist from Bild Zeitung. I think I'm the only one that was injured.
The air attacks that you referred to are defensive in nature. Since 1991, there has been a no-fly zone in the north of Iraq. This no-fly zone was imposed, I will recall for your audience, after the Iraqi regime forced the exodus of over 500,000 Kurdish inhabitants of northern Iraq. The UN passed Resolution 688 that said that this should not happen, and then a no-fly zone was imposed in the north.
There is no reference in any UN resolution to the establishment of no-fly zones in northern or southern Iraq. The US has imposed them, and with the British kept them in place, and the result is that civilians in the north and in the south, whose lives ostensibly are to be protected by the establishment of those no-fly zones, are being killed not by Iraqi soldiers or Iraqi planes, but by American bombings that go off course. That's who is killing the Iraqi civilians now in the northern and southern no-fly zones. One of the very bitter lessons of these years of war, both economic war and military war against Iraq, is that for the United States government, and I think for most governments in the Security Council, humanitarian considerations are simply not enough to influence policy. We have, of course, the famous statement by Madeleine Albright in 1996 when she was asked about the deaths at that time of 500,000 Iraqi children that have died as the result of sanctions. And of course, she did not dispute the figure. She simply thought about it for a moment and then said, on balance, we think it's worth it.
The 60-minute show entitled Punishing Saddam, where State Secretary Madeleine Albright made this insensitive remark, aired on May the 12th, 1996. It has since been censored by CBS under political pressure. If indeed the price is worth it, as Ms. Albright declared, again, who is paying that price? And what does it buy? Is it really an attempt to force Saddam out of power, as is being claimed by the United States administration?
Well, the Iraqi Liberation Act is an additional expression of our concern about the regime that's in charge in Baghdad. The United States believes that this situation involving Iraq would be immeasurably better were Saddam Hussein no longer the leader of Iraq. The act passed by Congress is designed to provide support and resources.
According to the Iraqi Liberation Act, they said that they are ready to give the Iraqi opposition non-lethal equipment. They are thinking about computers and mobiles and desks and so on, and I don't think that by mobiles and computers we will be able to remove Saddam Hussein from power.
In other parts of the world, Washington has never proved to come short of ideas and solid means to get rid of governments deemed hostile or worth removing.
In 1992, when we first established the INC, we were planning to have an uprising, national resistance against the regime. In April 1995, we started this uprising, the military operation of it, but the Americans refused again to support that uprising, and Saddam Hussein was able to crush it.
To this day, Saddam Hussein remains Washington's most convenient bogeyman, justifying the continuing pressure on Iraq and in the Gulf region in general.
There was a belief, I think, for many years that somehow sanctions would lead to the removal of Saddam Hussein. Very naive, because in fact, economic sanctions and their impact have made Saddam Hussein stronger.
Why the embargo strengthened the regime of Saddam Hussein? First, because the mere livelihood of people became dependent on the government. He controlled people through starving them. But more important is that the embargo created a new class living very comfortably attached to him. You see nobody getting 100 times as much as a doctor. Why? Because he is part of the security system. And therefore he should be fed well, he should be given good accommodation. He created a power base of people whose daily interests were tied to him, so that when he goes, they lose all these privileges.
Sanctions have sustained Saddam Hussein in power, and there are many of us worldwide who believe that is also a policy of the United States. Because of the Saddam Hussein threat, quote unquote, the Americans have sold arms on a massive scale to the Arab states, the Gulf, Israel, of course, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia.
After the Gulf War, U.S. arms manufacturers and the Pentagon took advantage of making new arms sales to the Middle East at the rate of about $1 billion a month.
The oil-producing countries in 1990 had hundreds of billions of dollars in reserve. Now they have maybe hundreds of billions in debt.
But Saddam also serves a more direct goal for the Pentagon.
The United States had to have a justification to remain in the area. It intended to maintain major military forces that could protect and control the natural resources of the region. It wasn't particularly welcome. The people of Saudi Arabia didn't really want U.S. troops on their soil. So Saddam was chosen to remain the devil that would justify the presence of the American angels in this region.
After the Gulf War, the buildup at places like King Khalid Military City, which was supposed to be temporary, has become sort of a bridge for a possible long-term U.S. military base in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East. There's now thousands of U.S. troops regularly in Saudi Arabia. So at least on a de facto basis, Saudi Arabia has become a military base for U.S. forces in the Middle East. Unless there's a change of regime, that base could well end up being permanent.
Proclaimed as a sweeping victory by almost all Western media, the Gulf War and the subsequent crisis with Iraq have indeed amounted to a superior victory for Washington. Paramount arms sales at a level never seen before, at last huge permanent military bases in Saudi Arabia, resulting in a better control of the oil flow and a better leverage on its pricing. The great losers, on the other hand, are the Iraqi population, still under a Stalin-like dictatorship and slowly dying from starvation. But the losers, however, are not just distant populations of the Middle East. Some of the victims of the Gulf War have also turned out to be right amongst the presumable victors of the war.
In 1991, most Americans were very happy that the Gulf War apparently had ended. It was a quick, decisive victory, and hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops were returning home to parades. What happened a few months later was that thousands of veterans started to report medical problems, such as achy joints, memory problems. They kept falling ill, they were getting rashes, and there was no explanation.
Concerning the use of the type of weapons used by the Allies in the Gulf War, the first warning came from soldiers themselves, whether in Britain or in the US, when they started complaining of symptoms, and that was related to the Gulf War and to the use of the weapons. So it's obvious that it took so long until people took it seriously, because there was this conspiracy of silence.
The first response of the United States military and the United States government was to ignore it, to deny that there was any problem with the health status of American Gulf War veterans.
You had to keep the image of the good guys, namely the Allied, and the bad guy, who is Saddam. It's Saddam Hussein who would use chemical weapons and who would harm his own population and the world with this type of weapons. And it didn't look very nice to show that the Allies have been themselves using weapons that were harmful.